Nerd Night. Stand back. We're all going to do science.
So, I'm going to talk to you about a bunch of different citizen and community science projects. But first, I want to start out with a question. Who here contributes to scientific knowledge on a daily basis? See a few hands here and there. By the end of this talk, everyone will be able to raise their hand. So, basic definitions. This is citizen community science, also talked about as participatory science or participatory research, is the involvement of the public or non-professional, quote-unquote, non-trained scientists in the scientific process. There's a whole bunch of ways that folks can do this. And so I'm going to talk about 4 or 5 of them, different areas with a bunch of different projects. You'll see on the top, there's a link for the slides. It's really small. Come find me afterwards. I'll send you the link because there's a bunch of links in here to different projects you can get started with. And so you can follow all this stuff on your own and continue to do all this work that you hopefully get inspired by. So the first thing I'll talk about is helping researchers analyze data, or counting penguins for science. So this is a platform that I work with a lot. It's called Zooniverse. It started with a project 10 years ago called Galaxy Zoo, which I'll talk about. Now there's over 100 different projects where you can do things like, as we mentioned, counting penguins for science. Did anybody remember, I think it was earlier this year, they found that massive new colony of penguins? No. So that was part of this. So you get an image of penguins, and you're supposed to help count how many there are. So you're counting penguins and figuring out population studies and like how they're being affected by climate change and things like that. Or if penguins are your thing, you want to look at galaxies. You can help classify shapes of galaxies. This was the very first Zooniverse project called Galaxy Zoo, and the astronomer at the time, Chris Lintott, who's at the University of Oxford, had hundreds of thousands of images of galaxies around the universe, and was like, why don't we have people who don't know anything about astronomy help us out? And maybe they can like match shapes. And he put a couple 100,000 up, and they thought, oh, this will take like 6 months. It was done in 2 weeks. He's like, oh, well, we have something here. One of the really cool things about this is that there's also a community talk section for each project and also for each image. And so folks were finding this type of galaxy. They look like green peas. They're like, what are these galaxies? Like, we've never seen, they don't fit in any of the classifications. Turns out they discovered a new type of galaxy that no one had seen before. It's named after this Dutch astronomer, like amateur astronomer. So, and they're called the green pea galaxy. Or you can get into paleoecology, which are the folks who work with like ice core samples and tree rings to understand how climate used to be hundreds of thousands of years ago. And so this is a project called Fossil Atmospheres. So you're looking at fossilized plants and looking at the number of stoma or stomata. Someone correct me. Never remember what the plural is for that. But so this is a way to understand how the climate at that time is reflected, and that can help these sort of long-term climate studies and seeing how things have changed over time. Or if you want to get really, really small, you can do this project called Higgs Hunters, which is where you're looking for basically the next Higgs boson particle. And so you're looking at visualizations of CERN collision data. Or you want to go back out to space and do like gravity waves discovery, LIGO, and things like that. So this is a project where you can help detect those. And one of the funny things is that what you're doing in this is trying to identify the noise patterns that will obscure the actual gravitational waves. And for after a long time of people seeing this very specific noise pattern, they realized that someone had their phone plugged in, and that was causing that. It's like, oh, okay, unplug the phone, and then that noise pattern disappeared. Again, that was discovered in the talk section. And finally, closer to home, this is a project that we work on in the design lab with an ecologist at the U of M, Dr. Naima Harris, where we have cameras up throughout the state, and every time a deer, mostly a deer, walks in front of the camera, it takes a picture. And so what we have about 200,000 or so images from around the state, and we want people like yourselves to help us identify what those are. So it could be a raccoon, could be a deer, a bear. We have not seen a wolverine, and we have not seen a cougar. If you see those, here's my phone number, please tell us, because we will get on the news and so will you. So we're still in the middle of season 2. We would love your help. We're about halfway done. We still need about 30,000 or so classifications left. So the link's there. We'd love your help in finishing that up. And then after that, we'll go on to season 3. So another thing, it's like, well, kids these days spend too much time on computers. I want to get outside. So you can do this thing, volunteer environmental monitoring, or counting and measuring things in the woods. So one of the biggest and probably like the original citizen science area has been birds and counting birds. And the Audubon bird count, has anybody done the Christmas bird count, Christmas Day bird count? So more than 100 years ago, the founder of the Audubon Society was like, hey, why don't we stop shooting birds on Christmas Day and count them instead? So that's what they did. And so every year around the country and around the world, people go out and count birds. It's like, so some people are listers, they just got to get all the birds. Others are just trying to figure out how many birds of species are there, or they do what's called a bioblitz, which is, go through and try to count all the different species of birds in a given area. So Cornell University and the Cornell Lab of Ornithology has taken this and run with it. There's all these different projects that you can do, and they're all sort of built around this eBird platform. So I encourage you to go check that out. But one of the really cool things this can do are things like this. And hopefully this animation will play because it's spectacular. Yes. So this is an animation of bird migrations of a specific type. And all of these are from observations by people on eBird and the Audubon bird counts and things like that. So it's an animation of their migration from the northern hemisphere to Central America and things like that. So just aggregating all of this work. But closer to home as well, you can go hang out with folks at the Huron River Watershed Council and do things like doing chemistry and flow monitoring. And this is where you get to go in the river in some waders and do pH testing, and you get to do monitor the flow and what the levels are at and things like that. And these are all the different sites that you do within the watershed. And so we're measuring things like turbidity and different levels of different chemicals that might be in there, what kinds of effects changing climates are having in this. But it's something that one training session you can do, because there's this standardized process that can then be repeatable and aggregatable by people at the water department, scientists, and things like that. So the link on the previous slide will take you to their volunteering page, and you can get involved with that. So in the summer, they do the chemistry and flow monitoring. In the winter, they do the stonefly search. So if you want to get outside in the winter, go to town. I will do it here because I used to live in Minnesota, and it's way nicer here in the winter. We also have something like global species observation data aggregation, or uploading pics of plants and animals from your phone. This is an app called iNaturalist. This app allows you to take a picture of something you see and then upload it to this platform, and then other people will say if your identification is right or if it's wrong. And then this becomes one of those data points in that bird migration. So for instance, I was out in Colorado driving up Mount Evans, and I saw this creature. It's a little hard to see. It's a fox, it's a red fox with a really giant tail. And I was like, oh, that's weird. That's a weird looking coyote, because I thought it was a coyote. Because I was like, you don't see a fox just hanging out outside like that. So I identified it as a coyote, and this is small and hard to read, but those three things beneath it are other folks telling me, Justin, that's not a coyote, that's a fox. And so as more people identify this as a red fox, that becomes a research grade observation and then can get aggregated into these larger studies. And so, you don't have to just do it on sort of charismatic animals like foxes, like rabbits, like squirrels. I work at the U, so there's lots of squirrels around. You can think, oh, why would I bother trying to find a good population number for squirrels? Like, well, if the population goes from 300,000 to 200,000 or 100,000 from there, that's a pretty big change. And so being able to understand what that is. So even if like, oh, this isn't really interesting, but in the aggregate, it is. And so being able to help out and contribute to that, again, if you have a smartphone, and you can also go in and identify things you know. So I've gone in, it's like, I know that Robin, it's like, yep, Robin. Ecology is not my background. I was a music major. So talk to me about birdsong. This is something that you can do as well. So community science, this is something where, these other ones were more about you doing some form of labor for a scientific project. Yeah, you're classifying images, or you're classifying sounds. There's some awesome bat projects where you're classifying sounds of bats, or you're helping to gather data. But this is something where you're gathering data sometimes for your own life. Community science often can be holding government accountable, or when someone's not doing their job. So we saw this in Flint when they were doing their own water samples and working with Mark Edwards at Virginia Tech, because they were seeing these things, they were doing their testing. It's like, no, that's totally fine. Like meets the federal limits. It's like, well, because they changed the sampling procedure, so it would fall under the limits. But there's also things like Public Lab. They have a bunch of different projects. They started with this balloon mapping project to get a better sense of where oil was spreading after the Deepwater Horizon spill in the Gulf. So they send this camera rig up on a balloon, and this can be with a cheap point-and-shoot camera that just has to shoot continuously, like a time-lapse, and set it up on this balloon. The most expensive thing, I think, is the helium that you have to get to fill the balloon. And then they have these gorgeous aerial maps of it. So we're working with it, with some folks to look at industrial pollution sites, because you can't see how high or how far they go back from over the fence, but if you get up 500 feet, you can see that. So this is something that people have done throughout the country. You build the harness out of a 2-liter bottle, and it just sits in there, and you use the like 2 strands of the other parts of the bottle for like stabilizing things, so it's great. You can get a kit, or you can make it all yourself. And finally, air monitoring. So this is one of many kinds of sort of handheld air quality sensors. I like this one because it looks like a ghost. And this will measure different kinds of what are called particulate matters. And so these are things that will get in your lungs, make you really sick, and you'll see them often around industrial plants, toxic waste sites, things like that, which are proportionally much closer to be cited to lower income minority communities than elsewhere. And so you see a lot of these things in places like Oakland and the ports, and can use these to track and see where there needs to be more testing done, or say, well, this is actually a problem, and now we have data to prove it. Finally, games. So there's a bunch of games out there that you can play that help with various projects. So stall catchers helps to understand Alzheimer's research. So one of the theories of this, and there's part of the Human Computation Institute, is that stalled blood vessels in the brain are one of the leading signifiers and causes of Alzheimer's. And so people are helping to identify these stalled blood vessels in over thousands and thousands of images. I'll show you a clip of that in a second. Eyewire, you're helping to map out neurons in the brain to better understand how things travel along neurons through the brain. And there's millions and millions and millions of neurons. To better understand, sort of develop this map of the brain. And finally, foldit is a protein folding game. And so this is something where you can try to imagine all of these different ways that proteins can fold, and then extrapolate from there what kinds of effects those would have. So it's sort of like the stuff, if you ever did SETI at home, where you lent your spare processing power, it's sort of like that, but you're using both the processing power and your own brain power to do that simultaneously. So this is an image from stall catchers. So what you're looking at is blood flow through a brain, and there is not a stall there. So that actually is flowing well, but you are trying to identify, if there's a stall there. And then this is also part of like these large tournaments. Teams will come together and they'll have thousands of people playing and things like that. Same thing with foldit and eyewire as well. So there's a whole bunch of other projects that I didn't even mention. There's a bunch of projects in Michigan that I didn't mention. But here's a bunch of ways that you can get involved with this. So SciStarter is out of Arizona State. They're a huge project aggregator. Any kind of topic, any kind of area, they'll have projects listed. Help a Scientist is something I just discovered. It's a Chrome extension that every time you open a new tab, it brings up a new project from SciStarter. So get a little inspiration, like, oh, help us make a discovery. Oh, that's cool. So Crowd in the Cloud is a 4-part PBS miniseries about citizen science that ranges all over the different topics that I've talked about. And then we also have a guide that student in the design lab, Kelly, who might be here, that she helped produce as well, so people can look at that. And that's open to everybody. So, who here contributes to scientific knowledge on a daily basis? Yeah, go. Thanks, y'all.
This program was recorded on August 16th, 2018 at Live, 102 South 1st Street, Ann Arbor, Michigan.